I'm Alex Hayes, and today I'm making a video about Brexit in preparation for Theresa May's speech today. And I want to clear up some what I think are misconceptions about the whole topic. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm not making a case for Brexit. I didn't vote for Brexit, and I'm not a Brexiteer. But I can see both sides of the argument, and I think that's something many people, especially, well, on both sides, but I tend to talk to people more on the left, and something they often fail to do is to see both sides of the argument and to see it as anything other than EU good, Brexit bad. For example, on my Facebook feed, there's a lot of, to put it bluntly, whining about Brexit on a pretty regular basis. So what I want to do in this video is essentially make it clear that there are arguments on both sides from a left-wing perspective, and that the case is not so simple as many people would have you believe. Now, I think the arguments from the left in favour of staying in the European Union are pretty well rehearsed, so I'm not going to go through them in detail. To summarise, I would say things like social protections, free movement of people being a human right, and that sort of thing, and many other things, obviously. But you can hear those things anywhere, so I'm not going to go through them right now. I'm going to instead show that there is a left-wing case for Brexit, and some of the people who've made that case and what they've said. So let's start with someone in the news a lot today, well, these days, Jeremy Corbyn, currently the leader of the Labour Party. Now, you may not always know it when he is leader, but he's had quite a Eurosceptic past, and he's had to temper that now, being the leader of the Labour Party, from a pragmatic perspective. But it still comes out in things like his famous, he's 7 out of 10 for Europe. Obviously, most other Labour leaders would have just said, I love Europe, I love the EU. You know, they wouldn't have even had a 7 out of 10 figure. But that just shows the fact that he has Eurosceptic roots. So, for example, in response to the Maastricht Treaty, which is one of the key European treaties, he said, "I'm sure that Labour MPs will vote against the Maastricht Treaty again tonight, primarily because it takes away from national parliaments the power to set economic policy and hands it over to an elected set of bankers." And another example is on human rights abuses. "We have EU trade agreements with a number of countries that include a human rights clause that has not been enforced or affected. Is it not time for us to look again at the whole strategy for the region?" Now, that's obviously something you could say also about the British government, but it's also a criticism of the EU, which is not by any means a perfect institution. And he's also called it undemocratic and certain things about it morally unjustifiable. So he has a long history of this. Now, someone I think is even more of a totemic figure on the Eurosceptic left would of course be Tony Benn. Now, he was a socialist and a Labour MP, but staunchly against the European Union. And here's a quote from him on the European Union. "When I saw how the European Union was developing, it was very obvious that what they had in mind was not democratic. I mean, in Britain you vote for the government, and therefore the government has to listen to you. And if you don't like it, you can change it. But in Europe, all the key positions are appointed, not elected. The Commission, for example, all appointed, not one of them elected. And my view about the European Union has always been, not that I'm hostile to foreigners, but that I am in favour of democracy. And I think out of this story we have to find an answer, because I certainly don't want to live in hostility to the European Union, but I think they're building an empire there, and they want us to be a part of that empire, and I don't want that." So as you can see, he's saying we should have our own democracy in our own country and not be part of this large bloc with some undemocratic elements, for example, the European Commission. And now, 2 points on this. Obviously, some people will say we have a very imperfect democracy ourselves, which is true. However, what's going to be an easier situation? Living in a country the size of the UK and trying to change that system, or living in an EU-sized country and trying to change the system in the whole of Europe? I think it's quite obvious that changing our own system is going to be significantly easier. Now, and the second point is where he says the European Commission is unelected, and it is. Now, some people will come back and say, well, your national governments choose the representatives of their country for the European Union, but that's a two steps removed democratic system, which a lot of people would call questionable at best. Something which we have here at the moment with Theresa May, who is not directly elected at all. She was only elected by Tory MPs, and a lot of people would say that is questionable as well. So obviously we do have that same problem again. But, again, in our own country, in a smaller country, we have much more potential to change that if we want to. So, to broaden things a little bit, I'm going to think about an anarchist Eurosceptic perspective. Now, obviously anarchism could be thought of as more of an extreme left position or an alternatively left position, but I think it shows that there are Eurosceptic voices all over the left. Now, there aren't many, obviously, high-profile anarchists in the UK at the moment, so this is from an anarchist blog called Wessex Solidarity. Now, the blog says, "The EU is nothing more than a bourgeois cartel that can only serve the interests of the bosses, and we have an opportunity to break it. We don't need Brussels any more than we need Westminster. Both represent the hegemony of old, rich, white men." And he or she finishes, "Ignore all the fugglies on the out campaign. Cameron wants you to vote in. The US government wants it. The Chinese Communist Party wants it. The CBI wants it. The IMF wants it. Hollande and Merkel want it. What more reasons do we need for voting out?" So this is something that I've said a few times and thought a few times, which is that, when something is backed so hard by the establishment, by big business, by government figures that are, have been in power and are in power now throughout our country and the world, is that not something that says to you they fear Brexit, and that Brexit might be something that threatens the existing power structures? And if you're a left-wing person, is that not something you should at least be considering might be a good thing? I think that is a persuasive argument for people on the left to at least consider. So to conclude, I presented Eurosceptic opinions from several people on the left, and I'm not making the case for Brexit myself to restate that, but what I am doing is trying to present a more nuanced picture of things, to say that there are arguments for being against the European Union and left-wing, just as there are arguments for being for the European Union and right-wing. This is a much more of a grey area situation than it is currently in the media and in mainstream discourse. If we lived in a world where people didn't act like sheep and merely copy the opinions of people that they agree with on most issues, for example, left-wing, right-wing, then I think we'd have a situation where there were large numbers of people for and against the European Union on the left and the right. But people seem to have aligned on this people seem to have aligned in their groups on this issue. And I think that's something we need to work on a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues where I would agree with the right-wing position on a certain issue, or the right would agree with a left-wing position if they actually thought it through. But you just take what your superiors, so to speak, tell you, and you agree with them. If you're on the right, you read the Daily Express, and you think X is bad, Y is good. If you're on the left, you read the Guardian, or you read the New Statesman, or whatever you read, and they say this is good, this is bad, and you believe that. Or Jeremy Corbyn says it. And I think we should develop a more nuanced and a more complex discourse where we say, we take each issue on its merits, especially such a big issue as Brexit, and we try and look through it with a cold, analytical gaze, as well as obviously you have to have an emotional, instinctive feel for the thing as well, but rather than just taking what people who agree with you say at face value. So that was the aim of this video today, and I hope you found it interesting and it's been thought-provoking for you. So thanks, and have a good one.